So then we are back with modern understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end, period Yirmiyahu the prophet. Then we find a layer of understanding of the time of the restoration, and then simultaneously a time of reduction. So then the holy cities of the Messiah that were laid waste for many centuries then return. So let's understand then, as far as the politics and trade, there is truly not much as far as the expansion of politics. Let's try to understand the simplicity of the agenda of the Creator then related with the time of the restoration. There is in fact no politics much involved in it. So let's try to understand why. When the Gentiles were included in the holy instructions related with the 61st chapter of Yirmiyahu the prophet, even the heathen would become part of the plan. You have to be very concerned with tabernacling and then understand as such. So then the Gentiles were involved with it. As Gentile level, they were included in a plan, not tabernacling, but then included in a plan. So let's understand why the Asian market is so prosperous. Because Shaliach Shaul was teaching then obviously in Asia Minor. The cities of the Messiah were known during the time of roughly 100 years after the ascension of the Messiah until 1009. They were very known. They did understand the principles of the new kingdom yet to come. So then, why do we have this scandalized scripture? What caused this scandalized scripture to become then evident? So let's understand. You find the Tzayelic lineage, a true scripture, and you find the Greco-Roman translation. Why was then the scripture then put together? The scandalized scripture is absolutely nonsense. Why were then these scriptures then scandalized? Because people during the time of the holy cities, they were not paying taxes. So politics then generated with these copy of the scandalized scripture because people were not paying taxes. Thus then the Balian system. They had combined then the system of Babylon with what they thought the Messiah then meant for them. Because the cities were so then involved with the region, and then those people over there involved with the holy cities, not in the holy cities themselves. They were outside of the holy cities. But they were receiving guidance as they were inquiring. Then obviously their dealings began to prosper. But then they were not paying taxes. Thus then the whole problem. That's why Constantine came later. And he scandalized then the understanding of the Messiah in Scripture because people were not paying taxes. The kingdoms were then absolutely, quote, drying from taxes. Thus then they had to come up with some sort of idea how to get the focus of the people so then the governments would become what they thought was God. Thus then politics. You find then religion and state mixed up together. Never worked. So what do we understand from the holy instructions as far as tabernacling is concerned? During the time of Samuel did not exist politics. Samuel was the prophet of the nation. He was the direct giver. And that was it. There was no politics. There was only tabernacling. Then later, because the people then of Israel became so envious of the other kingdoms because they had horses, then they had their own king, they would go out and fight, then Israel wanted to have a king. Obviously the Creator was displeased, so Samuel was very displeased. He was very angry. So then, yet they granted Shaul, the first king. It was a disaster. So we understand this time of restoration as per the original instructions. When the Creator included then the Gentiles in the midst of the understanding of the plan of the restoration, there is no politics. If you understand the simplicity of it, there is absolutely no politics. What do we find? We find then the freighters of the earth at some point then taking the charge of the world. So then during this preliminary time where then the main kingdoms, the kingdom of the north, east and south, are then uniting themselves, there are no politics. What we do understand is there is a demand or volume coming in the very near future where China won't be able to handle the volume. Are not the retailers complaining that there is not enough trade going on? People are not buying as much as before? Of course, people are buying online. The more people then they become acquainted with computerization, the more people begin to order because it's cheaper. So obviously, if you put your head to work, you can understand there is an increase of volume. But then we have to understand the instructions during the time of restoration. There is the first kingdom, second kingdom, third kingdom, kingdom of the north and south. Then we find then the relationship in Daniel the 11th chapter. We find the dragon and Baal then a couple chapters later. You have to read the Apocrypha. If you don't know where it's at, read the Catholic Bible. Then you understand the kingdom of the east is the dragon. The dragon can mix with the Balian system, because Balian system is confusion. The Chinese is not confused. They are purely trade. What destroys the market is the Balian system, up and down, up and down, up and down. Politicians, they get in the midst of it. The midman gets in the midst of it. Giving their opinions, their understanding, it never works, a disaster. That's why we have the understanding of the Baal and the dragon. So then because of the volume, China as it is, they won't be able to handle the volume. Nobody's talking about politics. A simple fact of a person becoming acquainted with a computer, having a banking linked up with the computer, and start buying online generates more volume. Is there politics? No, it's pure trade. But then as it is, China won't be able to handle the volume coming in the future, because then the US monetary system won't last for very long. Because we don't find the West, we find the North, we find the South, we find the East, we don't find the West. This means the West must get out of the way. Not being excluded, but then retrieving itself from the world's market for rebuilding. Then we find the kingdom of the north as the managers of China. Very simple, because you have to have a manager when you have then a very prosperous company. Then you understand Daniel, then dragon and the Baal. Baal and the dragon. Pure trade versus then the Babylonian system. Never works. Always up or down, up or down, up or down. What are the politics in the midst of it? It doesn't exist. What does exist is the factory speaking with the manager in turn speaking with the southern kingdom where most of the minerals or then raw materials are at. And they simply say, we want this much mineral, or these many tons of minerals. Then Mr. Zuma in turn visits with the other leaders of Africa, and they come up with a plan. Holy God, where is the politics of it? Simple orders, but then people has to go to work. The problem is you find governments not wanting to work. They prefer enjoying each other's incompetence. That's why the world is in a miserable situation as it is. So as long as we have the guideline of the scripture, it becomes very simple. There is no politics. There isn't, doesn't exist. So what can we expect of the future? As the rebuilding starts, big governments, they must lean up. How are they going to lean up? Because the freighters are in charge. At first, does not make any sense, because you have a big government, you have them freighters under the government, but then the situation is the Messiah is already in the future. He knows what's coming, and he said the freighters of the earth then in charge. So the government has to find a way of lining up with freighters. Why? Because is it not related because of volume? Don't we understand the retailers are already complaining? All because we don't have enough trade. Oh, duh! What did Daniel say regarding then the ending of the 1,000 years of deceit and then the entrance of the dragon's period? Knowledge would increase. What do you understand of knowledge from a viewpoint of a tradesperson such as Daniel? Computer. You order via computer. It's volume. So as the volume increases, you have to have a system of taxation. Then you find the governments leaning up because they must line up with the freighters. They must have a visit with the freighters of this nation, for instance, and ask them to line up their tracking system with the government's taxation system. So every time a parcel is generated with a label, description, price, taxation, it has to be done twice. Taxation twice. Why? Because when a person is either buying as an individual or a store, they buy for a certain price, taxed as such. Let's say if the government charges 10% tax, they get a product for 10, the government gets 1. But then the problem is when the retailers, they have 500% markup. Sometimes the government, they don't get their share, because there are products coming from abroad not taxed. So the government is not receiving proper taxes. So what you think a person then buying, for instance, products for very, quote, dirt cheap, they turn around, they have their markup, but the government doesn't have the first tax. Must be taxed both ways. So then there is a relation of level of 10% every time there is then funding movement. Thus then the government must lean up, because then it's lining up with freighters. We can't have any more stupid, dirty scoundrels of politicians. Because the normal factor of the time of the Restoration does not include politics. So what you can expect in the very near future, based from the Holy Instructions, and how used to be then the relationship of the Creator and prophecy, Creator and tabernacling, because the prophet always points the people back to the instructions. And there is no politics. Doesn't exist. Because kings were not part of the instructions. And this time, the Gentiles were included. That's why the Messiah said, the freighters of the earth, pure trade. So we can expect then the lining up of our government with taxation system via the freighters. Then the influence of the freighters in the very near future, when the volume increases, then you find the freighters with a very strong opinion. And most of the time they're going to get their way until the governments are leaning up. So those scoundrels of politicians don't even know how to put up a fence in their backyard. Those are gone. then the very politics of a nation must be very direct and related with trade. If the traders, they want a road over there in the midst of nowhere in the forest over there because there is a deposit there or there is mining over there, the government quickly must muster a team and get a road constructed. And if it's truly profitable, must have a refinery somewhere over there, or at least a fuel depot. Then they find another deposit over there even further, airstrip. They have to send a team over there with airstrip. And if the government does not know how to do this, then the traders simply contract a company to do the work for them. Then we hear these people talking regarding politics. It goes everywhere, but they have no direct understanding of the instructions. So there's a lot of people talking in the morning sometimes and after lunch, and then you have these programs and people go every direction you can ever imagine. But the problem is they don't have the principles. And the principles were outlined very precisely on instructions. So you can expect volume in a very huge mountain of volume. This then is reflected in airports, air cargo, ship's cargo, transportation via ground or then land. So if you observe it very intently, what's the reason for government other than maintaining the basics of a city, for instance? Roads, water, electricity. And if a CEO of those companies are then competent, doesn't even require a government. So let's start lining up ourselves with it, because it's very simple. So it's not, the problem is not education. Try to understand, the problem is not education. The problem is there is so much of it. And people, they get lost with so much education. Then you find scoundrels, PhDs in the government doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. They don't understand the economy, they don't understand manufacturing. They are dead weight. And the nation does not go any further. And then the government becomes a monstrosity without control. So let's evaluate the simplicity. So if you are a worthy nation, obviously it should be leaning up. And if you have then in a strategic geographical area, you want to have a port. You would have, obviously, of having a refinery or then a fuel depot. Because there is enough education already. So let's evaluate what the angel told Daniel regarding the Gentile level. He said then people would go to and fro. To and fro is then related with 1,000 years of deceit, where you heard then New World Order. There were no cities around. Then you find the end of the 1,000 years of deceit with increasing of knowledge. Because of what? Computerized trade. So the knowledge was already set for every situation or every event in 2009. Whatsoever we had learned as far as technology of 2009 should be more than enough to do the job during this time of the restoration. So coming up with these ridiculous gadgets of telephones with more capability because 4G, 10Gs, 20Gs, because the miserable stupid telephone can do so many functions, does not make any sense. It is freaking ridiculous. You don't have to have those damn gadgets. That's why then the Kingdom of the North, Soviet Union, is coming as very strong with their robust, simple equipment. There is no BS in them. So let's say, for instance, the Kingdom of the North makes a deal, obviously, with the Kingdom of the South. Mr. Putin, Mr. Zuma, for instance, they come up with a plan. You have to have equipment at least to reach the mines over there and get the ores out of the mine. What can you understand? You can understand then a tractor clearing up a plot of land. You understand then trucks then dumping rocks, making a road. Another tractor then smashing the rocks, making sure it's nice and even. From then on, what is cheap? Railroad tracks and carts. Then you find a terminal where they load those in trucks. Afterwards, you dump them in a furnace. You come up with then metal bars. From there goes to the ship. During this time, you have to have fuel and a fuel depot. Then you have to have a port so you can get petroleum. Holy God, where is the complication? Why do you have to have a damn stupid telephone with a 4Gs, 5Gs, and people playing around texting junk? Africa, we understand, is a very hot country. A lot of places does not have snow. A simple truck, simple repairs. You can imagine repair shops popping up everywhere in Africa. The Cross brand of the Soviet Union is very robust truck. No electronics, simple. You turn on the key, works every time. Goes to the maintenance, changes the oil, and then goes to work. If you want to play around with gadgets after work, then it's your own choice. But trying to mesmerize the citizens, oh, you have to have this telephone because you can do these many transactions in your telephone, who cares? Are you going to spend, for instance, 1,000 on a stupid telephone? No, you buy a cheap laptop. You upgrade your laptop a bit and you use a broadband. So diminishes your dependency upon these stupid electronic gadgets, this junk. The technology of 09 should be more than enough to do the job. Now let me ask you this, rough roads, are you going to use then the top of the line truck in Africa? No, you're not going to do it. First, because these modern trucks are complicated, replete with electronics, very fancy, complicated, very compact, and you can't fix in the midst of the forest. You have to have a simple system. That's why we understand then the Soviet Union becomes the Soviet Union once again and becomes higher because of the simplicity. The world is becoming complicated and the Soviets are simple. There are principles of formation. And with the same example, then it would be northern Brazil in Amazon. Are they going to send complicated trucks down there? Sensors everywhere and electronics, LCD panel and the whole nine yards? No. You get rid of these junk electronics. Only make sure there is an engine over there, some gauges, situation of the oil, then fuel. That's about it. And then a velocity meter. It does not require more than this. And then refineries. Do you think they're going to use top of the line fancy refineries? No. You're going to use what's simple. Find a nice drum over there, then you make sure you boil the petroleum. The simplest way you can ever make petroleum out of. Or petrol, should say. Or diesel. The most uncomplicated system you can ever imagine, because the volume, try to understand, the demand for volume overtakes the niceties of the Babylonian or the Bell's system. You know the Bell system, all because it has to go to this group of people they have to evaluate. Then it takes a long time. Then after this goes to another group of people they're going to evaluate even further. Because there is another group of people they have to make sure then the project get done properly. Because then comes the environmentalists, they want to make sure then they can do this right or properly or whatever name they want to use. Then goes to the president for the signature. Then they have to find a budget. There is no time for it. There is no time for it. Because governments are no longer in charge. The freighters are in charge. So the mindset changes for incompetent politicians and then changes with straightforward tradespeople. There is no time for BS anymore. When companies of the future start hiring then drivers, they're going to find a driver and a mechanic at the same time. Obviously, because if the damn thing breaks in the midst of the forest far away, they can get it fixed. This is how it used to be in the 50s. A decent driver was also a mechanic. A lot of the tire change in the old days had to be done by the driver. But these days people are so dependent of technology. Because then GPS, because then it's linked up with equipment in space, and then because there is electronics in the truck, because it's then under the control because of the velocity and this and that and the other, the drivers are dumb. The damn thing breaks, then they have to stop over on the side and wait. Can they do this in the midst of the forest? Because the fact is not dealing with cities anymore. It's dealing with the areas of the world with the most minerals. So let's simplify our lives and understand the freighters are going to be in charge, lean up the government. Because volume is coming, and if it's not managed properly, you won't get your parcel.